Good evening. It is 5:30 on August the 9th, 2022. City Council convenes in chambers in open session for the purposes of discussing the Citizens Advisory Committee recommendation. But prior to that, we will go into executive session so we can discuss pending or contemplated litigation or settlement agreement and to hold consultation with attorney under Section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code. So at this time, we will be in recess for executive session, and then we will be, so don't go anywhere. We hopefully will be back out fairly briefly. Thank you. It is 5:57. We are reconvening from executive session. We are here again and to discuss and hear and go through presentations or further presentations or questions regarding the Citizens Advisory Committee recommendations on street and roadway construction and repair needs, including the discussion on possible bond election. All right. Mr. Atkinson, I will turn it over to you for a minute.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, members of the Citizens Advisory Committee. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to ask Mike to come up. Mayor, we're going to put back up on the screen the tabular summary that was the recommendation or is the recommendation from your citizens. That's the other Mike, either one of them. There we go. So, Council, you're familiar with this. This is what you saw the other day. There have been no changes to this other than we have, on a single piece, been able to describe what the project is exactly. So number of lanes, whether it's back of curb improvements, the roadway length, and of course the estimated cost of that particular segment. For first line, 98th Street, Alcove to Upland, that roadway is located in District 5. It is approximately 1 mile, estimated cost of $12 million, and it would be 3-lane construction, and then it carries down the page. Gentlemen, if I could ask somebody to switch us one more page. Council, we had a question, a request for more information when we talk about the potential of paving unpaved roadways in Districts 1 and 2. What would those be? Many of y'all may recall we actually have a prioritized running list for our unpaved roadways. This is the next set that comes up on there, so you can see Newcomb between Avenue E and Mesa. That one's about 460 linear feet. Estimated cost of $170,000, carrying you down to the bottom. We could do one more click, please. There we go. So here's how those roadways are scattered out. Blow-ups on the right, big picture on the left. One more. One of the recommendations from the committee is related to rebuilding residential streets in the Dunbar-Manhattan Heights area. Prior slide was what that looks like tabular, thank you. And then the next, here it is on the map. So you can see the city location on the left and then the actual neighborhood over on the right. With that, we would take any questions you may have. The members of your committee are here as well, and staff's available, Mayor, to assist in any part of the discussion.
Right, I think one of the questions, I'll go ahead and get this started, and maybe this is not as much of a question as an affirmation of the ordinance or the resolution. And the goal here is for us to, of course, get every one of these streets and roads done. If we come in under, and I think one of the concerns for the people I've talked to and citizens is that we not take any excess funds and use it for something other than what's designated for. Do we feel comfortable that this addresses that with the language that if there are any funds remaining, they would only be used for those similar in nature or for not new construction, but roadways or expansions, those that are similar in nature to those listed in the exhibit? Is that the understanding of the resolution?
Yes, sir. And for those in the audience, we have prepared a draft resolution that the council could consider if they choose to call the bond election. That draft resolution lays out basically these same charts that we have had in front of us today. And then it describes pretty specifically that the council commits that the funds from the bond election will be strictly used to complete the street and roadway projects listed in Exhibit A. What's on your screen would be basically Exhibit A. Further, no funds from this bond election shall be used for any other street and roadway project unless and until all projects in Exhibit A are complete and the funds remain. If that's the case, the council shall consider expansion projects that are similar in nature to these listed here. The next paragraph below on this draft resolution goes into a little greater detail. So if we have finished this list, council, you can only go past this list if, of course, the use of the funds complies with state law, the projects that we've identified here are complete, and this council has voted for whatever that next project might be. And would also note similar language we propose to include in your actual bond ordinance. So I think, Mayor, to your point, it would be very tight. It would require this work to be performed. And if there were additional funds remaining when that work was done, you've got a defined process and a defined use that you would have to stay within.
Ms. Joy?
It wouldn't be this council, it would be.
It would be the council at whatever point in time.
There
Yes,
at
ma'am.
that point in time, okay.
I guess the question for us tonight in this session is, are we wanting to move forward with the committee's recommendation? And if we are going to move forward with the committee's recommendation, then we start the process of establishing what that looks like next week. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mayor. If it's the will of the council to move forward with this, I just need direction to do so. We would be required to hold 2 special meetings, and that's just because of the statutory calendar. Mayor, I think a couple of options, if the answer to those is yes, you could hold your first called meeting next Tuesday, August the 16th at 5 p.m. That would also be when you would take public comment on the proposal. You would then consider both the first reading of the bond ordinance and passage of this draft resolution that we just mentioned. You would have to have a second called meeting. You could do so the next day, Wednesday, August the 17th, possibly at noon. So it's really kind of where we need to end up today. Yes or no to the election, what's on the election, and can we make those meetings or some similar schedule work?
All right, questions from Mr. Atkinson on that line of thinking? Mr. Massengale.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess procedurally, I might suggest we might get a nod to see if everyone on the council is first supportive of an election, to move forward with a street bond, and then discuss as to content.
All right. Is anyone, let's maybe do it in reverse. Is anyone not in favor of moving forward with the bond election? Is everybody good with moving forward? All right. All right, Mr. Massengale.
Thank you, Mayor. So next, I think, is the question as to content. And my position was, the day we saw this, I'm very supportive of what the committee has put forward. One thing that has been on my mind that they reported to us that day was that up until about the nth hour, Broadway was going to be in their recommendation. And I don't think there would be any debate on whether or not Broadway is a need. It's one of our oldest streets in our community. It connects Texas Tech University to our interstate. And when you look at the recommendations, it's hard to look at it and say you might do 146th Street without addressing Broadway. Now, the committee's recommendation was a different recommendation from the original street bond, which was the segment from Q to Avenue E, and they also recommended the hybrid model. I am recommending for discussion today, adding another item to the ballot that would specifically address the committee's discussion and recommendation on Broadway. I yield the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Massingo. Does anybody have any further comment on that item or any thoughts on an additional ballot item? Mr. McBrayer.
Mr. Massingill, was your suggestion just the one segment of Broadway that they were talking about, or are you looking at both segments of Broadway?
My suggestion is to carry the committee's recommendation from their discussion as a separate ballot item. So you'd be able to, the voters would be able to vote on the package as presented from the committee, and then you would also have the an additional item to vote on up or down on Broadway.
But is that from Q to E, just Q to E?
That was their recommendation.
Okay.
Ms. Joy.
Let's be clear. I think the recommendation they brought to us was that we need to design Broadway, whether it be A to E, University to Canyon Lakes Drive. It needs to be designed before we jump off and trying to do something to Broadway. So I can't support a separate bond on this segment of Broadway. I don't even remember what the projected cost was, but we're already at $200 million on what we have. And so I am going to request from the city manager that we get with the parties who are involved with the brick streets, that being the TIF board, that being the historical group, that being council, and some public members about the design of that street before we start spending any money or trying to do a bond.
Ms. Martinez Garcia.
One thing about Broadway is we all know that it has a lot of historical value. The other aspect of it for me is that it is a street that unites us. We have 4th on Broadway, we have the Cinco de Mayo parade, the Veterans Parade, so there's a lot of historical value. But I would have to go along with Councilman Massingill that if we put it as a separate item. But that being said, I know that the advisory board did so much work and they did it in such a quick time that that's where we probably do need to come up with a better plan for it.
Dr. Wilson.
Yeah, so I think one of the concerns I have about putting Broadway up on a separate ballot is, not this council in particular, but councils in the past have been always questioned that we don't listen to our voters and we don't listen to our citizens. And that was one of the imminent reasons why we put a Citizens Advisory Committee together to move forward so quickly with a new bond. And at this point, I think, one of the biggest things we want to build with our citizens is trust, and that we listen to our citizens and what they think is important. None of us sitting up here think that Broadway is not important. We all drive Broadway every day. You guys that are in here drive Broadway every day. It does need to be fixed. But I also agree with Councilmember Joy that I think we need to look into what needs to happen on Broadway. We need to look into some of the older ordinances that require brick and do some more kind of background work before we are ready to move forward with Broadway. We do need to move forward at some point. It just is not this year on this bond package. And I think we stick with what our citizens have asked us to stick with and move forward with that.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Ms. Keister, could I ask you, we discussed it last week on your presentation, and again, thank you all for being here and involved in this. Could you just briefly review what the thought process was as far as moving forward? If we're going to look at this as a road that has to be repaired in the future, kind of what was the thought process that we could get some guidance moving forward as far as what this looks like, what y'all were thinking, and that might give us a little more information tonight.
Absolutely. The committee strongly felt that Broadway needs attention,
It was a large topic of conversation throughout every single meeting. And the project was in the recommended project list up until the very end. We could not get consensus on the actual design. The majority of our committee was in favor of a hybrid option, but it was never voted on. This was just part of discussion. And that was due to just the sheer reality of the available historic brick. And our committee felt that this bond is so important because it was split. We didn't want to put the overall project list at risk to include Broadway. There was a motion to bring Broadway as a separate proposition, and the committee felt that you, council, asked us to bring a single recommendation. And so that's where the committee went, was to opt to have a single proposition, and Broadway did not make it in the final list. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you, Ms. Keister. I kind of think that's where I shake out to the council is that, I don't want to put the entire project at risk. And if we can get this done and follow the advice of what our committee said, I think the people will say that was the advice, that's where we need to go. Obviously, everybody would have things that they would take out or put in if we had our druthers, but that's what you all came up with. And if it was difficult for you all to have a consensus, I'm afraid that the voters may have a difficulty having a consensus. So I'm of the opinion that we move forward with the recommendation of this committee and give direction of the staff to put that together for next week. Mr. McBrayer?
Yeah, Ms. Keister, was there any discussion in your group? We've got the project list that you gave to us. We don't have a priority on that project list. Was there any discussion in your group that the price tag of $200 million might also be a problem, given that the 175 in the previous bond issue failed?
So when we talked about prices, the committee was great at letting the needs drive the conversation. When we met for our last meeting, we looked deeper into how many lanes should we construct. Our original list grew during that meeting because the feeling was we shouldn't take this opportunity and not build the street we need in an effort just to save money, because we would have to come back and build the other 2 lanes. So that made the total project list grow. And if you're asking my opinion, I believe that combined with Broadway put the number over and above what the committee felt comfortable recommending.
Okay, thank you.
We had 2 votes against our final recommendation, and that may have been about the total dollars. But our committee unanimously supports, this initiative. So I think it was just a matter of where they felt the comfort level in terms of the total dollars.
Can I ask you one follow-up question? Because I remember from your presentation, I think, on you had a concern about tying segments together and not leaving completed. Was that one of your concerns on Upland Avenue?
Yes.
I mean, I went out and drove it the other night just to see I don't ever go to that part
Yes.
of town, so I went to drive it to see what's out there.
One of the Upland segments was added just for connectivity.
And which section was that?
I believe it was Upland from 19th to 34th.
And was that the sole reason it was put in for the connectivity?
Yes, sir.
Because that was a very vacant area
Yes.
of that street, and that's a $12 million
Right.
part of that price tag.
That's
there.
correct.
All right, that's one of my concerns.
Ms. Joy?
Ms. Keister, you mentioned connectivity, and that is a very big issue as well as a concern. Broadway doesn't stop at Avenue E. And that's not my district going that direction, but this is my community, it's my city. And I think we send the wrong message when we stop it at Avenue E. So I think connectivity is very important. We considered that in paved roads. We considered that in redoing streets in Manhattan Heights. It makes sense financially, but there's more than just a financial component to connectivity. It's connecting your city.
Ms. Patterson Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, that connectivity word kind of perked my ears up as well. And it's no secret that I've been wanting a bond to come before this city for a moment. Even when the one in last year failed, I wanted us to continue to try to put it before the citizens, because these are things that are needed and very important. In reference to the Broadway piece, and this is no secret either, you know, we created a 2040 plan that talks specifically about connectivity and specifically down Broadway. As Ms. Joy said, that Broadway doesn't end at Avenue E. And I wouldn't care when we did it or whatever. But if Broadway does not include going past Avenue A, I will not support it. I will not support it. I won't. Because that's something we continue to preach everywhere we go as to how important every citizen is. And we send a completely different message when we halt the work that needs to be done in the community, no matter where it is. This is no secret. You know, I've said this quite often. So with regard to the Broadway piece, coming up as it has been presented, that's a no for me. I can't do it. I'd rather, even with the piece that was provided, I could think of a whole bunch of other places, but I would not be selfish in this, because these are definitely some needs within this city. So I am good with us going forward. I say let's get things before the citizens so that they can let us know. I think we've done a decent thing in allowing citizens to kind of bring it to us. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson Harris. Ms. Martinez Garcia.
And I appreciate the needs and the wants and whatnot, but if my district, District 1, starts counting, okay, how many streets are actually getting worked on in my area, do you think they're going to want to support? They're not going to see that there's need in District 1? And don't you think they'll be discouraged and not want to support what's happening in District 2 or 5 or any of the others, that they're getting more? So I think it's also a matter of balance. So, and I think compromise is important. And that's why, you know, I would like to see the area of Broadway that we did talk about, but I'm willing to compromise, and I would hope that that would be the same from other council members.
Ms. Patterson Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for that invite, Councilwoman Martinez. I will still say that we created a 2040 plan for this city that says connectivity from Texas Tech down to the Canyon Lakes. We're talking about a Canyon Lakes that is, you know, a lot of folks don't even think about it being what district that it's in, and it just got to District 2. Proud of that, it was District 1. So the deal of it is still to look at it as a part of this city. We have tons of citizens who utilize the Canyon Lakes day in, day out for all types of things. And one specific is disc golf that takes place at any given day of the week. You can count at least 300 or more people. So the fact that it's in District 2 now, hey, I'm good, but it wasn't always. So my deal of it is, even when it was not, I was still preaching the fact that connectivity was the way to go. And I don't think we necessarily start counting what is or what isn't, because we can do that with anything this city does, and it won't appear to be equal or equitable. But what I'm saying is, what we decided as a council for the forward motion for this city was connectivity, so that citizens, no matter where they are, they feel a part. Well,
Let's bring it back to getting into the districts and, I guess we could always refer back to Mark and say, well, he's got, one thing on here, and that's actually back of curb. But I do want to remind you that what we're talking about is people that we appointed. And those are the people that we put out and said, come to us with the package, and this is what they brought us. And so I don't necessarily want us to go down the road of that with this, because this is what our people said. And I just want to make that a reminder that that's what we're trying to do in the city, is to listen. We talked about it on campaign trails. We talked about it last time when the bond package failed, that we want to listen and move forward with what our citizens advise. And so I think that's where we're at this point, making a decision on whether or not this is something that we want to move forward with. And if this is the package that we're going to give staff direction with, so next week they can bring this. I think the recommendation of the committee with Ms. Keister was that they do encourage us to come up with a plan for Broadway. And I think that would be our next step, is we don't sit on this for years and years and years. We need to come up with a plan for this. And I think that will be our next steps as we move into the fall with priorities. This needs to be priority, because I think that's what happens is we bury our head in the sand and say, okay, well, it'll be somebody else's issue, and we can't do that this time. So I'm of the opinion that we move forward with discussing whether or not this is something we're going to go forward with, and then we come back to the table with another work session and discuss Broadway, and then discuss the merits of connectivity versus district versus all the way in and out, and then we can have that conversation. I just don't know if that's where we need to go right now. Is that fair enough? Mr. Massengale?
Thank you, Mayor. Let me try to bookend this. First of all, I appreciate the discussion. I bring it up because I had a lot of input from citizens to bring it up. There are people that this is very important to, okay? I believe personally it's very important that we maintain the velocity that we have with our downtown revitalization. And I can see it's apparent I don't have the support on it, but I think what's more important is that we at least discussed it, because it's arguably a need in my mind. It is not a want. And so I am very supportive of the package as presented. I will encourage this council to immediately start on the efforts so that we can plan on what Broadway is going to look like. And my position on that is we get the biggest bang for the buck for our taxpayers while honoring the legacy of the bricks, and figure out what our plan is to fix what I consider is a very, very important corridor in our community.
I think that, Mr. Atkinson, I think that is something that goes back to the staff for us to start looking forward to working on.
Absolutely.
I think that's pretty clear after tonight.
Yes.
So any other questions of Ms. Keister on this current advisory committee's recommendation? Do we have any other questions of her or anybody else on the committee? All right.
Just another thing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I think that's, can we get just a raise of hands of the committee members? I know several couldn't make it here tonight because thankfully for the rain, they couldn't get here. How great was that? But again, very, very grateful for all of your work. I know that was quick, and y'all got down and dirty and just got it done, and we're very grateful to you, and I think the city is as well. If I could just, we're not a formal vote. Is anybody of the opinion that we not move forward, giving staff the direction to move forward with this for next week? Anybody against this committee recommendation?
No.
No? All right, is everybody good? Y'all good? I get in that mic? All right, I think that's the direction, and then we will look at next Tuesday, coming back and having comments at 5 o'clock.
Yes, sir.
I'm good, Mr. Mayor.
Good, thank you.
And I'm good too, Mr. Mayor.
All right. All right, well, we will do that, and then we will plan the second reading to be at noon next Wednesday. And then we will hopefully be able to get this on the ballot, and it'll be a great thing for the city. Thank you very much. With that, it is 6:26, and we are adjourned.